My journey these past couple of years hasn't been easy. Good, bad, or indifferent, it was worth it. Throughout my journey, I had so many inspirations, so many things that made me see things in a different light, even view myself from a different perspective, understanding that I don't have to be just another statistic, that I can seek to be who I want to be, not who they set out for me to be. With that being said, this is my response to the legendary Pedro Petri's Puerto Rican obituary, Puerto Rican resurrection. Hold up, what's going on? We've let too much time pass. It's been going on for far too long, struggling just to survive. Things seem so wrong. We worked, we were always on time. We were never late, just trying to survive. If it wasn't for Juan, Miguel, Milagro, Olga, Manuel, I would still be in denial. All dying for an American dream, waiting for their lottery numbers to hit, the promotion that never came and a system that never gave a fuck from the beginning. So understanding and learning everything they struggled through, why do we continue to keep the cycle going? Thank you. While screaming, yo soy boricua, pa que tú lo sepa. Please tell me, what good does that do if we continue to contribute to the system that has us where we're at? And I'm not saying you gotta be the next Captain Puerto Rico, I'm not saying all that. But let's look at the facts. So from 1493 until 1898, Spain ruled the island of Borinquen. And within that time, we'd had massive genocide. So many people died on both sides. And what do I mean by both sides? Our Afro and Taino side that we could never deny because we hold with so much pride everything they went through just to survive, while the conquistadors took the whole island on a ride, committing so many criminal acts that words can never describe. 1898, here comes big old Tío Sam, el savior de Puerto Rico, decreasing the currency by 40%. Cause who needs to survive when you got Tío Sam's checks by your side? Can't forget about the imposement of citizenship, forcing us to rely, while Tío Sam takes a ride on the road of taxation without representation, and that comes with a lot of exploitation. Oh, what a great nation of which we reside. But what I realize, if you remove us from history, we don't see a future. This is why it's important to understand who is Pedro Avisu Campos, who is Arturo Alfonso Chambre, who is Lolita Lebron, who is Ramon Emeterio Betances, who is Mariana Bracetti, who are the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party, who are the Young Lords. All representation of greatness, all in their own right. But we are them and they are us, fighting for the same cause, liberation, self-determination, with no limitations. So we won't be dying, hating the make-believe steaks or the bulletproof rice and beans, or waiting for the supervisor to die to get that promotion. We will die freeing our bodies without having to use physical strength, but by arming ourselves with knowledge and education, not just for now, but for the future. Viva Puerto Rico libre, pa'lante, siempre pa'lante. Thank you. We about to start the book. We got 1 hour and 45 minutes left of the book. Let's tap that screen, shake up the algorithm. Let's get to 1K likes. Alright, we back at it. Salute to everybody. We got 1 hour and 45 minutes left of the book. We're going to continue Puerto Rico and national history. Don't forget, we also have them up on YouTube. So if you guys missed any of the parts of the book and want to go back up to catch up, they are live on, well, they are uploaded onto YouTube. Same name as here, Afro Taino 88. So if you guys want, you can always go subscribe, go check it out. But without further ado, let's get straight to it. We got an hour and 44 minutes left. This chapter is about 30 minutes, so let's get through the rest of this book today. So mañana we can start something new. Let's tap that screen, share this live. If this is your first time here, I do believe in socialism, free education, free housing, and free healthcare. So by tapping the screen and sharing this live, it's just showing me a little bit of socialist love and support to be able to get the message out to the masses. Without further ado, let's pick up where we left off.
Chapter 13. The night everything went silent. I called my 78-year-old grandmother late in the afternoon on September 19th, 2017. Her voice sounded calm. She assured me that she was safe. In a matter of hours, Puerto Rico would feel the wrath of a Category 5 hurricane, barely weeks after Hurricane Irma had barreled through the Caribbean. While Irma did not directly impact Puerto Rico, it demonstrated that the archipelago was not ready for a massive storm. Irma alone cost $700 million in damages and 4 deaths, and left 1 million people without electricity. Most houses in Puerto Rico are built with cement, precisely because of our long history with storms and hurricanes. My grandmother's house, however, was made of wood. It was not the same house I grew up in. That one was also made of wood and had burned down in an electrical fire. While it might have been beautiful, the building material marked my grandmother's working class status. "I love you. Don't worry about me. Everything will be okay." Those were her last words before hanging up the phone. That night, the winds howled, haunting everyone's sleep, but Puerto Rico itself seemed to go silent. Hurricane Maria made landfall the next morning. "That noise," she later recalled. "I will never forget the hurricane's noise. It sounded like the devil was howling." I would not hear anything from her for days. I was one of thousands of people from allá afuera, desperately waiting for any news. Phone communication was impossible. There was no internet. On social media, someone recommended a phone app that resembled a radio scanner. People organized dozens of channels trying to search for loved ones. It seemed as if there was a channel for each of the 78 municipalities in Puerto Rico. I quickly joined the Aguadilla channel only to find that everyone on it was in the United States. Like me, they were desperate for news. Several days after the hurricane, I received a call from one of my abuela's neighbors and a dear family friend. "Your abuela is fine. I don't have much time. I found cell phone reception and I have a list of people that I need to call to let them know their family members are well. But she's fine. Her house is fine." I cried with relief. I cried with guilt. Guilt for having electricity and potable water. I cried because I had lived through other hurricanes in the archipelago and had spent months without essential services. I cried because I knew that there were no recent precedents for what had just happened in Puerto Rico. I still cry. I cry as I write these words. As a result of Hurricanes Irma and Maria, the island of Barbuda was left uninhabitable. Dominica resembled a war zone. And while the government failed to admit it, experts estimated Puerto Rico's death toll to be in the thousands. Some people had to bury their loved ones in their backyards because their houses were effectively cut off after bridges collapsed and landslides covered what once were roads. Hurricane Maria left the people of Puerto Rico without electricity and potable water for months on end. It hit an island already suffering a stagnating economy and deep social crisis. The storm did not stop the following day. Its aftermath continued with great might and fury, taking the lives of thousands of people. Its effects continued because of Puerto Rico's failing infrastructure and, as we know now, colonial neglect. The storm. I could write a detailed narrative about the suffering that people went through that night. There are thousands of stories of people struggling for their lives, thousands of stories of people who failed in that struggle. I will refrain from doing so, however. The wounds from those stories are still raw, as if the hurricane never left the archipelago. And including those stories for the sake of advancing this book's narrative could end up perpetuating violence, trauma, and pain, as historian and literary scholar Sadilla Hartman has powerfully demonstrated in her work. Puerto Ricans have been dealing with hurricanes for centuries. Indigenous communities adapted to them. They harvested tubers like yucca and yams. They identified caverns to hide in during storms, which they tended to predict according to weather patterns. One of their deities was also named Huracán. Some scholars have argued that the word hurricane comes from this term. Colonial governments from both Spain and later the United States also came to terms with hurricanes. The first challenge that the U.S. occupation faced in Puerto Rico was not resistance or insurrection, but the fury of San Ciriaco, a Category 4 hurricane in 1899 that left 3,370 people dead and caused millions in damages.
Listen.
Puerto Rico was hit by 6 major hurricanes during the 20th century alone. Álvarez Guedes, a Cuban comedian, has commented on how hurricanes have become ingrained in Puerto Rican culture. In one of his jokes, he notes that he was visiting San Juan before a major hurricane. Everyone was joyful in the streets and the stores had sold out of alcohol. That time, the island got lucky, and the hurricane changed its course. The next day, however, Guedes noted that there was a depressive aura around San Juan. The mayor came on TV and said, "Do not lose faith. We might have better luck the next time around." There's a hidden truth behind Guedes' story. Hurricanes have been imagined as a time when people come together and obligations are suspended. As Puerto Rican scholar Aurora Santiago Ortiz has argued, as a child, I romanticized hurricanes, remembering nights playing dominoes, listening to the radio, telling ghost stories. When people learned that a hurricane was on the way, they began their ritual of flocking to supermarkets and gas stations, nailing wooden panels to their windows, and praying to their deity of choice. But as many survivors noted, nothing prepared them for Maria. On the night of September 19th, 2017, Puerto Ricans braced themselves for a Category 5 hurricane with sustained winds of 175 miles per hour. After wreaking havoc on the island of Barbuda, its winds slowed to 155 miles per hour. Maria had become a Category 4 hurricane by the time it made landfall in the town of Yabucoa the following day at 6:15 a.m. For hours, the people of Puerto Rico submitted to its merciless wrath. Over 40 inches of rain were reported in parts of the island, and the winds seemed to destroy everything in their path. Zinc roofs that protected poor and working-class families flew away and danced in the air. For some, disasters like Hurricane Maria can be regarded as great equalizers. Natural events do not care about class, race, or gender. While this might be true, disasters are not natural. They are natural events that cause human-made disasters. Poor and working-class communities, which in Puerto Rico are also often predominantly black and brown, live in high-risk spaces with much greater chances of experiencing flooding, landslides, and other calamities. Their humble houses are often made of materials that cannot withstand such winds. While shelters are often provided by municipal governments, many return to their homes only to see what little they had accrued throughout their life destroyed in the blink of an eye. Again, there are many Puerto Ricos. And depending on which Puerto Rico they inhabited, People experienced Hurricane Maria differently. Thousands of buildings were damaged by Maria, bridges collapsed, and hundreds of people went missing in the floods that swept through the archipelago. In the town of Jabucoa, located in the main island's eastern region, 99% of the municipal buildings collapsed. A report from the RAND Corporation painted a dire picture. 100% of the power grid, 95% of cellular sites, and 43% of wastewater treatment plants were inoperable.
And the thing with Yabucoa, it's a lot of mountain terrain. So you have a lot of people who live on top of the mountain, and you got a lot of people who live on the bottom. So you got a lot of debris. Like the top of the mountain deals with a lot of the wind, a lot of the houses being blown off, and the houses on the bottom deal with a lot of the massive flooding coming from the top of the mountain, trickling on its way down. So this is what makes, a lot of that's how it is in most places in Puerto Rico. But when Maria hit, it hit Yabucoa first, and when it hit, like they're describing in the book, it destroyed a lot of infrastructure. That's actually one of the main reasons why we chose Yabucoa as one of our stomping grounds when we do our projects in Puerto Rico, is because they're still trying to recover from Hurricane Maria and then Hurricane Fiona right after that, and there's more hurricanes to come, because like what they're describing in the book, that's the climate of where Puerto Rico is geographically located. That's what happens. This is not something new to them, to us.
There were more than 40,000 landslides, and more than 97% of Puerto Rico's roads were impassable.
And really quick, go look up the Marcos Sanchez Community Center. It used to be the Marcos Sanchez Escuela, but it closed down due to the Promesa bill and the depopulation of the youth within that community. But go look it up. The community has taken it over. It was a closed down school. They converted it into a community emergency center, so it is being set up for emergency purposes. They set up the IT room. The last time we was there, we was able to see the IT component of it with all the necessary things that they needed to be able to have it as a safety place for the community. And they're also committing to community activities and community bonding. And that's something that's really needed within the whole island of Puerto Rico, a safe haven place for the communities to gather at.
This created a health crisis, as more than 95% of the population lacked drinking water for weeks, and 28% of state-run health centers that received federal funds were damaged. It took the central government several days before they could communicate with all of Puerto Rico's 78 municipalities.
Thank you for the follow.
Maria wasn't the only reason behind such devastation.
And that's why the IT room is so huge for the Marcos Sanchez Community Center, is because it's attached to their communication room. And like they just said, they were down for communication with the outside world because the infrastructure that they had was collapsing. So this is why it's important for, the Marcos Sanchez Community Center to invest in their own communication station, so that way they're not, detached from the outside world when natural disasters do happen.
Puerto Rico's infrastructure had been vulnerable for decades. Power outages had become part of everyday life. Puerto Ricans drank contaminated water on an almost daily basis. A report from the Natural Resources Defense Council noted that in 2015, 99.5% of Puerto Rico's population was served by community water systems in violation of the Safe Drinking Water Act, or SDWA, and 66.4% of the people of the islands were served by water sources that violated SDWA's health standards. The situation was so dire that from 2005 to 2015, Puerto Rico had a total of 33,842 violations to the Safe Drinking Water Act, including violations of health-based standards, monitoring violations, and reporting violations. In the southern town of
But you have to look at the lack of effort into the infrastructure, right? The financial backing to these infrastructures to be able to have them meet the standards that they're supposed to meet. Like, you can see that the money doesn't go where it needs to go. And even now, Puerto Rico's trying to rebuild, especially with its infrastructure. But how do you rebuild if you're constantly paying back a debt that you're obligated to pay, and not for nothing they see the money before you see it?
Guayama, Applied Energy Services, or AES,
Thank you for the follow.
a multinational corporation based out of Arlington, Virginia, produced about 800 tons of coal ash daily. It began operations in 2002, and for almost 2 decades dumped ash into a toxic waste site more than 12 stories tall.
Thank you for the follow.
A study by the UPR noted that chronic illnesses like cancer and respiratory problems had doubled between 2016 and 2018 in Guayama.
Wow.
Ignoring residents, activists, and even the Puerto Rican government, AES did not cover the ashes before Hurricane Maria. They relocated them next to...
Really quick, definitely put this book on in your cart. But we also have all these live streams up on YouTube. So this is the last hour and 30 minutes left. So you can find the rest of this audiobook on my YouTube channel, AfroTaino88. So just in case whoever doesn't have audio out there, I do believe in socialism, free education, free housing, and free healthcare. So you guys can go to my YouTube channel, AfroTaino88, the same way it's here, and go watch those. Go re-listen to those books. We also have the Huey P. Newton Reader up there. We got War Against All Puerto Ricans, and mañana we're starting a new book, probably American History Cuba, which is one of my favorite books. But let's finish this out. We got an hour and 32 minutes.
An aquifer that supplied potable water to a large part of the archipelago's main island. As local activists in Guayama had made clear, the state's neglect and AES's greed did not take into consideration the health of nearby residents.
Mm-hmm.
The fiscal crisis and austerity measures imposed by several administrations had also heavily impacted public services, including healthcare provision. When the storm hit, these conditions exacerbated its impact. The government originally noted that the hurricane had only resulted in 16 deaths. But given Puerto Rico's conditions before the storm, everyone knew those numbers were false.
Mm-hmm.
Maria's death toll did not stop when the storm left the archipelago.
Listen up.
Infrastructural collapse, colonial neglect from the U.S. government,
Tap that screen.
and
Tap that
mishandling
screen.
by local officials caused the deaths of thousands of people. After the storm. "This room is full of love. You can feel the love," uttered President Donald J. Trump as he entered a church full of desperate Puerto Ricans. Most of them had been displaced by Maria's wrath. Some had been transported from different shelters in the San Juan area. It was a staged event for a few photographs. Trump sported a rain jacket. Some Puerto Ricans had not had electricity for almost a year.
Mm-hmm.
Trump spent less than 5 hours in the archipelago. This event became a powerful symbol that ignited rage across the archipelago and the Puerto Rican diaspora. Trump's visit took place shortly after a press conference that included the President, First Lady Melania Trump, Governor Ricardo Rosselló, and Puerto Rico's First Lady, Beatriz Rosselló. As Trump spoke to the cameras, the Puerto Rican governor took selfies in the background. "This governor did not play politics," noted Trump. "He didn't play it at all. He was saying it like it was, and he was giving us the highest grades. And I want to, on behalf of our country, I want to thank you." Trump noted, "Now, I hate to tell you, Puerto Rico, but you've thrown our budget a little out of whack because we've spent a lot of money on Puerto Rico, and that's fine. We've saved a lot of lives." He went on to argue that Katrina had been a real catastrophe with tremendous hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that died.
Yo, even creating that comparisons is going to leave people to sit there and argue and see who went through what disaster the worst. Like, That's not what you do as a president. They both were catastrophes. There's no reason why anybody in government position would even utter some ignorant shit like that to cause more division amongst the people.
What happened here, he noted, was just totally overpowering. What is your death count as of this moment? 17? The governor replied, 16 certified. The president touted, 16 people versus in the thousands. You can be very proud of all of your people, all of our people working together. The reality, however, was very different. The official figure was wrong. Thousands of people died because of Maria and its aftermath. Shortly after the hurricane, people began reporting deaths that had not been included in the official count. It seemed like everyone knew someone who had lost a loved one in the storm. By November 2017, the government had declared 55 deaths. The Centro de Periodismo Investigativo published a report on November 16, noting they had discovered at least 44 previously unreported deaths. That number is now in the hundreds. 10 months after the hurricane, there were more than 300 unidentified bodies stored in air-conditioned containers at Puerto Rico's Forensic Science Institute.
That's fucking crazy.
The mounting pressure for accountability pushed the Puerto Rican government in February 2018 to request an external report from the University of Puerto Rico and George Washington University about Maria-related deaths. Another study led by the Universidad Carlos Albizu in San Juan and an institution in Cambridge, Massachusetts, took place simultaneously. Their results were published on July 12, 2018, in the New England Journal of Medicine. They concluded that the number of excess deaths related to Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico is more than 70 times the official estimate. They surveyed 3,299 randomly chosen households across Puerto Rico and estimated a mortality rate of 14.3 deaths per 1,000 persons from September 20 to December 31st, 2017. They concluded, our estimate of 4,645 excess deaths is likely to be conservative, since subsequent adjustments for survivor bias and household size increase this estimate to more than 5,000. The number 4,645 became a recurrent theme in the protests that took place the following months. For the Trump administration, the low number of originally reported deaths was a good story. U.S. media outlets also picked up the story, but highlighted how federal incompetency was creating a humanitarian crisis. Journalists flocked to Puerto Rico looking for stories. In the process, Puerto Ricans were portrayed as hopeless and in need of saving. In the immediate aftermath, people desperately sought to leave the island and arrived at the Luis Muñoz Marin Airport in droves, trying to find flights at an inoperative airport. The way this event was covered in the media, anthropologist Hilda Llorens has argued, reproduced several stereotypes about what she calls the disastrous tropics. Imagery from the disastrous tropics, notes Llorens, quintessentially depicts individuals, groups, and crowds who look variously stunned, bewildered, dejected, destitute, traumatized, unfit, ill, disabled, dying, or dead. The idea that Puerto Ricans needed to be saved from the disastrous tropics and themselves was accompanied by a justification. Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens. The federal government had an obligation to help, not because of their humanity, but because of their citizenship status. This created what filmmaker, writer, and scholar Frances Negron Montaner has called rhetorical citizenship. U.S. journalists, corporations, and citizens began arguing about the need to help the 3.5 million American citizens of Puerto Rico. Even Mo, the bartender from The Simpsons, raised funds to help Puerto Rico. This rhetorical citizenship obscures three things, according to Negron Montaner. It does not recognize the U.S. occupation of Puerto Rico as an act of colonialism. It also ignores the intimate ties between colonialism and racism, for citizenship has never offered full protection for racialized, colonial, and otherwise minoritized legal citizens in the United States. Lastly, it fails to accept colonial responsibility or shared humanity. While Puerto Ricans were portrayed as U.S. citizens, the federal government did not respond to Maria's destruction the same way it did to hurricanes in Florida and Texas. A study conducted by BMJ Global Health concluded that there had been a marked disparity in the time it took victims of Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico to receive assistance as opposed to the U.S. mainland. When the mayor of San Juan claimed on U.S. national television that Puerto Ricans were dying, Donald Trump began an online feud. Addressing Mayor Julín and others, Trump tweeted, "They want everything done for themselves when it should be a community effort." What he failed to recognize, or willfully ignored, was the fact that without the rapid response of communities working in solidarity with one another, the death toll would have been much higher. Community as survival. After Maria, many Puerto Ricans felt that they were living in a stateless country. For those inland, government relief, local or federal, took weeks to arrive. In the town of San Sebastián, retired workers from the Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority, or PREPA, reconnected the service for their communities. Impromptu neighborhood brigades began clearing roadways, and communities without power gathered all they had left in their fridges to prepare collective meals. When food did arrive from FEMA, it was without any nutritional value. A study by George Washington University noted that the food sent to Puerto Rico after Maria did not meet federal dietary standards. In the wake of the storm, volunteer-run centers of mutual aid, known as CAMs, Centro de Apoyo Mutuo, began to appear throughout the archipelago. In their study of these CAMs, sociologists Jacqueline Villarrubia Mendoza and Roberto Vélez Vélez found that the experience with Hurricane Irma had already initiated conversations about what could happen in a major catastrophe. The first CAM opened its doors in the eastern town of Caguas 9 days after Maria. While it emerged in the post-storm context, its members had been part of grassroots projects around food justice since the 2010 UPR strike. Shortly after they appeared in Caguas, 14 additional CAMs began operating in different parts of the archipelago, including the island municipality of Vieques. Villarrubia Mendoza and Vélez Vélez note that the majority opened in the inland municipalities that had been most affected and were also most neglected by the state. Each CAM had goals based on the community's needs. While autonomous, there were also efforts to bring the CAMs together in national dialogues to share strategies and actions. Their programs were organized around themes like agriculture, nutrition, culture, economy, education, geriatrics, health, sustainability, reconstruction, and housing. In Las Carolinas, a neighborhood in the municipality of Caguas, anthropologist Sara Molinari noted that residents went without water service for 3 months, without electricity for 7 months, and without storm municipal debris pickup for 80 days. To make things more complicated, 60 to 70% of the community's 2,500 residents are over 55 years old, and 1 in 3 households lives under the poverty level. Las Carolinas was a woman-led CAM occupying a school that had been closed in pre-Maria austerity measures. While FEMA officials complained about a supposed culture of wanting everything to get done for them, the Las Carolinas CAM offered 100 lunches 3 times a week to elderly and bedridden residents, while also providing company and support. In the words of Molinari, the Las Carolinas CAM created a space of healing, care work, and learning that has shifted in response to the community's needs from the emergency to longer-term recovery and local transformation. Other spaces were also transformed by community needs. Before the storm, El Local was a dive bar in Santurce where multiple underground scenes met to dance, sing karaoke, or listen to local punk bands. The space began as an anarchist public library and events space, but turned into a node in San Juan's underground nightlife. In the wake of the storm, El Local reopened its doors with another purpose. Bands took the stage, but lacking power, they played acoustic sets during the day to take advantage of the sunlight. They also opened La Cocina Huracanada, a space to share meals, resources, basic support, information, and knowledge. Armed with a commercial gas stove and a host of volunteers, La Cocina Huracanada prepared meals for anyone who needed them. Professional organizations also mobilized their resources to help communities in need. Social psychologist Blanca Ortiz Torres noted that a month after the emergency, she was part of an initiative organized by the Puerto Rican College of Physicians and Surgeons. They organized 10 groups composed by physicians of several specialties. For example, pediatricians, family MDs, endocrinologists, nurses, and at least one behavioral health professional, which could include psychologists, counselors, or social workers. After meeting with residents of the Valle Hill community, a poor neighborhood in the northeastern region heavily impacted by the hurricane, Ortiz Torres initiated an 8-month collaboration. Their intervention was intended to empower community members to organize autonomously and gain access to essential services. These efforts demonstrate that in the absence of relief from the state, communities relied on themselves to survive. Some media outlets began circulating tropes of resilience. The hashtag Puerto Rico se levanta was also used. But focusing on resilience ignores the fact that people who had suffered multiple traumas were doing what they needed to survive. Celebrating resilience shifted blame away from the state and toward the individual. For many, Maria painfully revealed that the U.S. government continued to view Puerto Ricans as second-class citizens at best, lazy and in need of saving at worst. The storm's impact laid bare Puerto Rico's frail infrastructure caused by decades of social, political, and fiscal crises. It also demonstrated the colonial reality of the archipelago. Maria was not a singular event. It was part of broader processes that preceded it and continue long after its winds have passed. Chapter 14. The Storm After Maria.
Really quick before we continue, let's set a goal to 15K, y'all. We at 9.4, so let's tap that screen. Let's get to 15K to be able to shake up the algorithm and get more people in here. I really appreciate everybody love and support who's tapping in, who likes the book and appreciate the knowledge and education. Don't forget to go on YouTube and hit subscribe on Afro Taino 88 just in case you guys missed any of the book and the content. You can always catch up later on, but I'm gonna stop talking so we can keep playing, so we can keep moving forward.
Many people died in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria, because they lacked basic necessities like water. A few days after the storm, the mayor of Rincon sent a desperate message to the central government via satellite phone asking for water as residents were being driven to despair in a municipality that looked as if a nuclear bomb had been dropped on it. Lack of access to potable water led to a rise in cases of leptospirosis, a bacterial disease transmitted through infected animals' urine.
Listen.
Without electricity, water pumping stations could not operate, and the archipelago suffered massive flooding, leaving Puerto Ricans to drink from contaminated waterways.
These are the elements that they don't tell you about when a natural disaster happens, to kind of brush it under the rug like it's not that serious.
5 days after the hurricane made landfall, a picture from the eastern town of Humacao went viral. In an act of desperation, its residents had painted on a street, SOS, we need water and food, for passing helicopters. In August 2017, a month before the hurricane, FEMA admitted to having lost a truck full of water. It was not the first time, and it wouldn't be the last.
Nope.
On September 11th, 2018, almost a year after Maria made landfall in Puerto Rico, an amateur photographer flew a drone over an abandoned military airport in the eastern town of Ceiba. The pictures he took sparked public outrage. There were 20,000 pallets laden with unopened water bottles.
Listen.
In total, about 1,440,000 bottles had been left to spoil in the sun.
Listen.
FEMA blamed the local Puerto Rican government, who then blamed the U.S. federal government. The following year, in July 2019, another shipment of thousands of water bottles was found unused in an empty lot in the town of Dorado. Whether these were cases of corruption or mishandling of supplies, many Puerto Ricans were incensed. As reports confirmed that deaths numbered in the thousands and not dozens as the government had initially claimed, the huge quantities of water bottles triggered conversations about how many lives could have been saved if not for local and federal neglect. The number provided by the Universidad Carlos Albizu report, 4,645, began gracing protest banners and posters, and it was spray-painted throughout San Juan. Immediately after the hurricane, the Puerto Rican global diaspora came together to seek ways to help those in the archipelago. The diaspora's response once again highlighted the idea of the nation as unbound from a fixed location. Puerto Ricans around the world organized to send funds, food, and medical supplies. Millions of dollars were raised to help rebuild Puerto Rico. The question then became how to best deliver money and supplies. The Puerto Rican First Lady, Beatriz Rosselló, created a nonprofit organization called Unidos por Puerto Rico. The organization received more than $41.1 million from private individuals and corporations. Many did not trust the Rosselló administration and decided to use other organizations like the Maria Fund, which served as an umbrella for grassroots groups. Intuitive distrust in the government proved to be well placed. On August 10, 2018, Radio Isla 1320, a local radio station, posted a video on their Facebook page showing 12 containers full of supplies originally received through Unidos por Puerto Rico on the premises of Puerto Rico's Electoral Commission. The video revealed desperately needed first aid supplies covered in animal feces. The National Guard, who oversaw their distribution, said some had arrived already expired. The FBI later launched an investigation into Unidos por Puerto Rico. A few weeks before the media found the containers, Ricardo Rosselló fired Puerto Rico's Secretary of the Treasury, Raúl Maldonado Gautier. Before being fired, the secretary had publicly compared the Rosselló administration to an institutionalized mafia. Angered by his father's dismissal, Raúl Maldonado Nieves wrote a series of incendiary Facebook posts that led him to be interviewed on public radio. What he said was shocking. According to Maldonado Nieves, his father had been fired for investigating Beatriz Rosselló's involvement with the Electoral Commission containers. He went even further, arguing that Ricardo Rosselló, in collaboration with the tax consulting firm BDO Puerto Rico, had altered a report regarding the management of supplies to benefit his wife. Instead of distributing supplies, argued Maldonado Nieves, Rosselló wanted to make news out of them. Beatriz Rosselló responded that the allegations made against her and her husband were false. But instead of dealing with the political fallout, the governor and his family left the country for a European vacation. While Rosselló traveled, several members of his administration were arrested. Federal agencies began an investigation of ASES, Administración de Seguros de Salud de Puerto Rico, the administration of health plans, which eventually led to the resignation and later arrest of Ángela Ávila Marrero. Perhaps more explosive was the news that Secretary of Education, Julia Kelleher, who had closed hundreds of schools, had also been arrested. Two others close to the administration, Fernando Ferrer Cailet from the tax firm BDO and Mayra Ponce from the Department of Education, were arrested as well. 6 members of Ricardo Rosselló's inner circle were federally charged with corruption, conspiracy, and fraud by a grand jury. Then came the leaks. Verano 2019. On July 9th, 2019, as Ricardo Rosselló and his family enjoyed their European vacation, PPD legislator Carlos Bianchi Angleró published a few pages of a text chat between the governor and his inner circle. In the leaked conversation, the governor and his friends, whom he called Los Brothers, mocked Secretary of Justice Wanda Vázquez and the Senate's president, Tomás Rivera Chats. The officials had been using the Telegram phone application, which encrypts messages and self-destroys the content from its server. Rosselló's brothers were an inner circle of 11 cabinet members and friends in the private sector, all young professionals and entrepreneurs. As its first pages demonstrated, the chat not only mocked political adversaries, but also shaped policy. It gave members of the private sector access to confidential and privileged government information. The backlash was immediate. As the first pages were leaked, people began calling for the resignation of everyone involved. The president of the Senate, also a member of the governor's party, declared, "All of them need to go." The following day, local news broke the story of the arrest of Secretary of Education Julia Kelleher and other members of the Rosselló administration. By the end of the day, a small group had gathered in front of the governor's mansion to protest. That same day, the Twitter hashtag Ricky Renuncia went live. In the coming weeks, protests intensified and proliferated. Meanwhile, hashtag Ricky Renuncia became, according to Twitter, the most relevant and transcendental hashtag in the history of the platform thus far, garnering 1.3 million interactions. There were many reasons to be angry. People were living through ongoing political and fiscal crises. Government inefficiency had created a death sentence for thousands after Hurricane Maria. Now they were reading seemingly live transcripts detailing the corrupt ways that government officials schemed with the private sector to shape public policy for the benefit of a handful of people. As political tensions grew, another section of the controversial chat was leaked. 26 pages of Ricardo Rosselló's responses to the junta's policies. "My authorized expressions," noted the governor. "Dear Oversight Board, go fuck yourself." The new pages not only demonstrated how the governor handled politics, but also showcased shockingly casual sexism. Chat members referred to Natalie Yaresco, chair of the junta, as gatita, Pussycat. In reference to Melissa Mark Viverito, former Speaker of the New York City Council, Rosselló wrote, "Our people need to come out and defend Tom Perez, former chair of the Democratic National Committee, and jump on that whore." He also used similar words to refer to Alexandra Lúgaro, who ran for governor in 2016 and 2020. The maelstrom forced the governor to cut his vacation short. Back in Puerto Rico, he was greeted by an infuriated populace, banging pots in protest. Rosselló begged for forgiveness, arguing that the chat was just a way to let off steam after long workdays. His lukewarm response was followed by another leak on July 12th. The newly released pages documented a continued pattern of sexist comments against women. They also showed chat members scheming to shape public narratives about the administration. The night of July 12th, an anonymous source contacted Omaya Sosa Pascual, a journalist who had co-founded the Centro de Periodismo Investigativo, or CPI. The source offered her the complete transcript of the infamous chat. Sosa Pascual assembled a team of journalists who spent all night reading and verifying the document. The following morning, the CPI published the 889-page chat. A political storm without precedent in the country's electoral history had started. The chat's publication confirmed what everyone already knew, but it also sadly demonstrated the ways in which Rosselló and his inner circle poked fun at the misery Puerto Ricans were living through. They joked about dead bodies and Maria's destruction of a humble house next to the governor's cottage. The chat was also rife with sexist, homophobic, fatphobic, classist, and degrading comments toward politicians, public figures, activists, and everyday citizens. Finally, the chat clearly documented the ways in which people from the private sector had gained access to confidential government information that benefited their businesses. What began as a small protest in front of the governor's mansion grew into a massive movement with no clear leaders. Every single day, there were calls for protests and marches. It seemed like all it took to begin a protest was a flyer on social media. With each passing day, the events drew larger crowds. On July 17, 2019, for example, almost 500,000 people flooded the streets of San Juan demanding the resignation of Ricardo Rosselló. It was, without a doubt, one of the largest protests in the country's history, comparable to the movement against the U.S. Navy in Vieques in the early 2000s and the strike against the privatization of the telephone company in 1998. Celebrities like rapper Residente, rap artist Bad Bunny, and pop star Ricky Martin, among others, joined the movement. The huge protest that took place on July 17th was not a one-time event. 5 days later, another massive march of more than 500,000 people took over San Juan's main expressway. When Chief of Police Henry Escalera asked that event organizers meet with the police, he was ridiculed on social media. There were no organizers. These events were not isolated. They are part of a vibrant culture of protest that emerged since at least 2006 in response to austerity measures, university budget cuts, and punitive logics. Unlike the protests of the past, plurality was the marker that defined the protest movement that emerged against Rosselló and his administration. There seemed to be new forms of protest every day. The movement was not solely confined to Puerto Rico's metropolitan area, but expanded throughout the archipelago. People protested on horseback, on bicycles, in kayaks, and through yoga and acts of civil disobedience. In the morning, there were activities for children and families. Evening cacerolazos, pot-banging sessions, could be heard throughout the city. Many of these events were centered around the joy of coming together to enact change. But people were also angry. rage had ignited action. In Fortaleza Street, later symbolically renamed Resistance Street, clashes between police and protesters took place almost every night. While daily activities were for everyone, nights were for combat, as a member of the Movimiento Socialista de Trabajadores noted. At around 11:30 p.m., the police called the protests done for the day. When people refused to leave, they would disperse them using force. On July 17th, a police officer declared through a megaphone that the Constitution had been suspended. The heavily militarized police force then proceeded to use rubber bullets, pepper spray, and tear gas against the assembled crowd. People resisted with rocks, water bottles, and anything they could find. Media coverage focused on the protesters' actions, but the American Civil Liberties Union noted that police had infiltrated the crowd. In the past, protests were dismissed as solely attended by Los Pelus, a reference to socialists and students, typically thought of as long-haired and unruly. What happened in Puerto Rico that summer severely challenged preconceived notions of the protest movement.
Thank you for the follow.
People from different backgrounds and lived experiences came together under #Ricky Renuncia. Although the governor's resignation was their clear goal, other demands were articulated by different groups. One example of this was Rey Charlie, a young garbage collector and motorcycle enthusiast who took social media by storm. During the July 17th protests, Rey Charlie led a 3,000-strong motorcade through San Juan's metropolitan area. His working-class followers made sure to stop at different housing projects, inviting others to join them. As social justice scholar Aurora Santiago Ortiz and I have noted, when he addressed both the procession members and the Puerto Rican news network via live feed, Charlie transmitted the message of not only calling for the resignation of Rosselló, but also mused discursively about marginalization and oppression, acknowledging the political potential of the poor and humble. Ultimately, this overturned and directly challenged many assumptions of both the left and right about the marginalized classes' disinterest in political processes beyond the ballot box. While protests happened every day over a 2-week period, other protest repertoires also occurred in different parts of the archipelago, including queer balls and perreo combativo, combative perreo dances. And social media became yet another space where people came together both across the islands and in the diaspora to actively demand Rosselló's resignation. When the police were ready to disperse crowds in front of Fortaleza Street, those watching live feeds from any part of the world could alert their friends and loved ones on the ground. Protesters also set up crowdfunding accounts to buy protective gear like water, gas masks, and first aid kits. For many, it was the first time they had attended a political rally. Others had participated in Puerto Rico's long history of protest. They were reminders that this protest movement was not spontaneous. There were veterans from Afro-descendant groups like Colectivo Ile, students who had participated in the 2010 and 2017 University of Puerto Rico strikes, and participants from the long-standing and vibrant environmental justice movement, all taking to the streets. One of the most vocal groups was the Colectiva Feminista en Construcción, a black feminist organization that began organizing in 2013. While La Cole was publicly ignored by the Rosselló administration, those who participated in the chat had mocked Shariana Ferrer Núñez, the organization's spokesperson. They were paying attention to the organization's actions. The variety of tactics La Cole used to capture media attention in previous years laid the groundwork for some of the actions and discourses amplified in the Verano 19 protests. Through actions like camping in front of the governor's mansion and organizing impromptu protests in the Puerto Rican Senate or Plaza Las Américas, people had noticed La Cole's actions. One of their most important campaigns was their demand for the Puerto Rican government to declare a state of emergency due to the high number of femicides in the archipelago before that summer, and these demands only increased during the Verano 19 protests. In a desperate attempt to control the narrative, Rosselló agreed to be interviewed by Fox News journalist Shepard Smith on July 22nd. During 17 excruciating minutes, Rosselló struggled to answer Smith's questions. Repeating his rehearsed prompts, he also maintained he would not resign. When Smith asked Rosselló to name people who had come forward in his support, the governor ignored the question. The reporter asked again, and Rosselló vaguely answered, "I've talked to people from different groups, a lot of people from my administration." Smith asked him to name a single person. "The mayor of San Sebastián, a municipality located in northwest Puerto Rico," Rosselló answered. The interview was a public relations disaster. A few hours later, Javier Jiménez, the mayor of San Sebastián, denied the governor's claim. As the protests continued, members of the PNP distanced themselves from Rosselló. Meanwhile, his closest allies were resigning. His father, Pedro Rosselló, traveled to Puerto Rico to see if he could close ranks within the party, but was unsuccessful. To make matters worse, the protest movement had been picked up by international news outlets. On July 23rd, the day after hundreds of thousands marched through the streets of San Juan, the protests were front-page headlines in the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, and Miami Herald. Then, on July 24th, rumors began circulating that Rosselló would resign. Journalists were alerted that the governor was going to address them in his mansion at 5 in the afternoon. The minutes turned into hours, and journalists were moved from the patio to a room inside. These improvised decisions signaled the chaos happening behind closed doors. By 7 that evening, a crowd had gathered in front of the Fortaleza. The usual evening protests would start soon. This time, however,
Thank you for the
there
follow.
was a celebratory aura. A perreo combativo had been convened in front of the mansion, but because of the massive turnout, it moved a few blocks away to the steps of San Juan's Cathedral. 7 minutes to midnight, on the eve of the anniversary of the 1898 U.S. occupation, the 1952 creation of the Commonwealth, and the assassination of 2 young independentistas at the Cerro Maravilla in 1978, a pre-recorded message from the governor was aired. Silence fell on the streets, households, and the global Puerto Rican diaspora. The speech lasted 14 minutes. When Rosselló announced his resignation, effective August 2nd, millions of Puerto Ricans celebrated an unprecedented historical moment in the archipelago. After the celebrations came the crucial question: what now? Pedro Pierluisi, who had lost the 2016 primary.
Yo, really quick, if you guys came in the middle of the live today, or you guys are listening to this book for the first time, you guys can go on my YouTube, AfroTaino88, and all the lives are up there. They're categorized, so you can listen to War Against All Puerto Ricans, you can listen to the Huey P. Newton Reader, you can listen to Puerto Rico and National History. They're all up there. This is the last 50 minutes of this book, guys, so let's end it out with a bang. We almost had 15 at the goal, but let's set it higher. Let's go to 20K because we got 50 minutes. Let's keep it going.
And served as the Junta's attorney, had been named Puerto Rico's Secretary of State by Rosselló, and was thus next in the chain of succession. The Puerto Rican Senate, however, had blocked his confirmation. When Rosselló resigned, there was no clear successor. In the political vacuum, Pierluisi claimed the governorship and was sworn in by a judge at his sister's house on August 2nd. 3 days later, the Senate met and did not confirm his appointment as Secretary of State. Pierluisi could not claim the governor's seat. The Supreme Court stepped in and agreed that his appointment had been unconstitutional. Next in the chain of succession was Wanda Vázquez Garced, the Secretary of Justice. She became the new governor of Puerto Rico. For many of those who had participated in the summer protests, Governor Vázquez Garced was more of the same. After all, she had been part of the Rosselló administration, accused of failing to properly investigate irregularities with, for example, Beatriz Rosselló's missing containers. Impromptu popular assemblies began to appear throughout the archipelago. Known as the People's Assemblies, these were autonomously organized. Each had a different set of priorities, but they shared collective concerns about the auditing of the Puerto Rican debt, the privatization of essential services, and the social impacts of the ongoing fiscal crisis. The People's Assemblies promised a continuation of the movement, but fatigue had set in and the assemblies quickly dispersed. The everyday experiences of living in economic scarcity likely also played a factor. Some members, however, went on to join other community grassroots groups that became part of the assembly's afterlives.
Listen.
The continuation of the Rosselló administration, even after his resignation, should not be considered a failure. In fact, the Verano 19 protests challenge the fixed binary of success or failure.
Thank you.
As philosopher Pedro Lebrón notes, the beauty of the summer of 2019 was the collective subject that emerged across ideological differences for that moment. For example, pro-statehood, pro-commonwealth, pro-independence, atheists, Christians, anti-colonial, feminist, queer, etc. While it is certain that the summer of 2019 changed us in some way, its effects on an intersubjective level are unknown. Participating in the summer events allowed many Puerto Ricans to envision a future otherwise, a future they could build collectively. Ongoing disaster. What is going on? I was suddenly awake. The room was violently shaking and the walls shrieking. I stood up but fell to the ground. My wife crawled to our child's bedroom. It was January 7th, 2020. For a few seconds that went on for eternity, we felt the might of a 6.4 magnitude earthquake. After the initial quake, we rushed outside to meet with neighbors. Everyone shared experiences and then went silent. The power was out, and we stood next to each other without a sense of what would happen next. But at least we were all together. When we finally went back to our apartment to get some much-needed rest, the shaking came back. It was the first of many aftershocks for us. But for many others, it was not the first. Beginning on December 28, 2019, Puerto Rico's Southern District experienced a swarm of more than 9,000 earthquakes, 11 of them greater than 5.0 magnitude. A report by the United States Geological Survey noted that aftershocks will persist for years to decades. We experienced the earthquake while living in the northern town of Manatí. The quake's epicenter, however, had been in the southern town of Guánica. As the day progressed, the news of damage in southern municipalities circulated. Images of collapsed houses appeared on social media and local news outlets. The photographs shed light on the geographical inequities in Puerto Rico. While the Southern District had been the center of industrialization projects in the 1960s, it had receded economically in later decades and was now home to abandoned oil refineries. The residents in the most impacted municipalities and in the communities that had been most affected were mostly non-white and black Puerto Ricans. When anthropologist Hilda Llorens interviewed a medical doctor who had worked in the region for 40 years, he noted that sharp increases in illnesses were due to contaminants from the AES, Applied Energy Services coal power plant, the Aguirre Power Complex, and the GMO, genetically modified organisms, agrochemical industries. But most importantly, he noted, the worst illness afflicting the region is poverty. Because this is a poor region, people are powerless. They have little political clout and voice with which to defend themselves against the onslaught of contaminating industries cited here. Once again, solidarity efforts became a lifeline for many. Immediately after the earthquake, people organized fundraising campaigns to help those in the greatest need. The government discouraged traveling to the southern municipalities in the immediate hours after the earthquake because some bridges and roads needed to be assessed for infrastructural damages. Once travel was possible, thousands of people made their way to the town of Guanica with donations. As had happened with Hurricane Maria, the earthquake laid bare Puerto Rico's frail infrastructure. A collapsed school in Guanica triggered conversations about children's safety. A day after the January 7th earthquake, Puerto Rico's College of Engineers noted that only 500 of the 857 public schools in Puerto Rico that had not been closed by the Rosselló administration were reinforced to sustain an earthquake. The town of Guanica endured aftershocks that continued to worsen its already fragile infrastructure. The situation became so dire that people slept outside their houses for weeks. Some were lucky enough to find shelter in truck containers. Others slept in cars or tents. The earthquake's aftermath was one of multiple disasters caused by the country's fiscal crisis. It exacerbated social problems that many people had already been living with for years. And as the aftermath of Maria had shown, people could not depend on the local or federal government for any sort of relief. Many mayors in the affected municipalities complained about the lack of help from Puerto Rico's central government. As people struggled to survive, a Facebook Live feed once again triggered collective rage.
Listen.
On January 19th, an investigative blogger known as León Fiscalizador began a live stream at a warehouse in the southern municipality of Ponce. In what felt like déjà vu for many of us watching, the live video showed a warehouse full of supplies that had not been distributed. Thousands of products ranging from water to diapers, from stoves to sleeping cots. The blogger had received an anonymous tip from someone within the PNP administration claiming to be loyal to the party but fed up with such abuses. The video went viral, garnering more than 700,000 views. Groups began arriving at the warehouse and stormed it, redistributing the supplies until the police arrived and cleared them away. Governor Wanda Vázquez Garced denied knowledge of the warehouse but was forced to publicly retract her statement. The government also confirmed that there were other warehouses full of supplies. As feminist scholar Marisol Lebrón has noted, many felt that she was handling the earthquake recovery efforts in a similar manner to how her predecessor, the disgraced former Governor Ricardo Rosselló, handled Hurricanes Irma and Maria. Governor Vázquez Garced denied responsibility and blamed the previous administration. But as Lebrón notes, the irony, of course, is that Vázquez was part of the previous administration, and many of her advisors and cabinet members were also part of the Rosselló government and, thus, implicated in the very corruption and ineptitude from which she was now trying to distance herself. The warehouse incident triggered a series of protests that evoked the Verano 19 protests. Night after night, protesters banged pots, marched, and demanded the resignation of Vázquez Garced. They even created a life-size guillotine as a symbol of what needed to be done with Puerto Rico's political class. Such corruption was systemic, a malaise that permeated Puerto Rico's elites, or what scholar activists Joaquín Villanueva, Martín Cobian, and Félix Rodríguez have called the Criollo Bloc. This bloc is a managerial class and political elite who administers the colony and whose wealth has been generationally inherited by virtue of their privileged racial position and their historical class alliances. Although many people expected a sequel to the Verano 19 events, political exhaustion was apparent as the low turnout and the ephemeral nature of these protests demonstrated. As different social sectors demanded the resignation of Governor Vázquez Garced, the country's frail health infrastructure was about to face another challenge: the coronavirus pandemic. In March 2020, the Puerto Rican government activated the U.S. National Guard and imposed a 2-week lockdown. It was followed by strict curfews. As the pandemic continued, many Puerto Ricans complained that tourists used the archipelago as their playground. They also criticized the ways the government catered to wealthy foreigners and crypto impresarios through tax exemptions.
I mean, look what happened recently, right? You had an establishment burnt down by a tourist who was intoxicated and wanted to be spiteful because the business was closing.
Meanwhile, hundreds of thousands of Puerto Ricans, far more than those who participated in the Great Migration of the mid-20th century, left the archipelago, possibly for good. Chapter 15: Broken Memories and Future-Oriented Histories. In the Verano 19 protests, activists used banners and social media to argue that the Puerto Rican government hated its people. The Rosselló group chat on Telegram seemed to confirm just that. On January 18, 2019, the brothers, as the chat members referred to themselves, commented about an announcement that President Trump was going to make the following day about the humanitarian crisis unfolding at the U.S. southern border. They joked that Trump would declare that he was selling Puerto Rico to Russia. One of the brothers was Edwin Miranda, a publicist who tried to conceal his propaganda work for the Rosselló administration once the chat was leaked. But the Centro de Periodismo Investigativo showcased multiple instances in which he used his agency to promote the former governor's image in social media and news outlets. Miranda jested, "I saw the future. It's so wonderful. There are no Puerto Ricans." His words became almost prophetic. Puerto Rico's population fell to 3.3 million in the 2020 census, meaning the archipelago had lost 11.8% of its peoples in a decade. Hundreds of thousands left in the wake of the fiscal crisis, natural disasters, and colonial neglect. In the mid-20th century's Great Migration, the state facilitated the relocation of people, intending to pave the way for modernization. The post-war economy created a labor market that allowed Puerto Ricans to find a plethora of limited opportunities. Many migrated without knowing that they were numbers in a broader structural plan laid out by the Puerto Rican government. Migration became part of the state's official policy. Unlike previous large-scale migrations, however, Puerto Rico is not headed toward industrialization or modernization in the first decades of the 21st century. Quite the opposite. The archipelago is moving toward collapse, as there is no clear government plan or agenda to address the fiscal crisis aside from a strategy to attract wealthy U.S. foreigners, the latest iteration of Puerto Rico's fiscal dependency on foreign investment. As Puerto Ricans continue to arrive in the United States in the thousands, they find a precarious labor market. The global pandemic, skyrocketing oil prices, and military conflicts have created a dire international economic situation. Puerto Ricans also face structural racism. White supremacy, or the idea of white people's superiority, has been a foundational ideology in the United States.
Listen,
A wave of protests has highlighted the racial inequities in the country after a series of police-led assassinations of African American people, including Tamir Rice, George Floyd, and Sandra Bland, to mention just a few. The presidency of Donald Trump emboldened white supremacist groups, which have become more vocal and active ever since. In 2014, a few months after I moved to the United States for graduate school, I was told to go back to my country by an older gentleman when he overheard me speaking Spanish to my daughter at a store. It was a subtle reminder that for some people, Puerto Ricans are not welcome in the United States. But since Puerto Ricans have U.S. citizenship, albeit second class, we carry privileges that other Latinx communities do not have. Race and class also play an important role in how Puerto Ricans are racialized in the United States. My position as an educated, light-skinned Puerto Rican affords me privileges that I cannot overlook. There are still many Puerto Ricos and hundreds of thousands of migration stories. The demographic changes the Puerto Rican nation is facing are not only triggered by migration. A report published by City University of New York's Center for Puerto Rican Studies, noted that by 2017, senior citizens, those older than 65, were the only demographic group of Puerto Ricans with positive growth rates. This is in part due to lower fertility rates, increased lifespans, and the migration of people of childbearing age. The older population's growth is taking place at a moment when the Puerto Rican government has slashed the retirement pensions of teachers, university professors, and government employees to tackle the fiscal crisis. When I was growing up, any conversation about the potential independence of Puerto Rico was met with the same comment. Do you want to become another Cuba or Dominican Republic? Beneath the xenophobic and racist undertones of these comments, there was a concern about poverty and lack of infrastructure that made life difficult in those countries.
Yeah, but what's the core of that is the geopolitical dynamic the United States plays in that situation. You know, especially with Cuba. Would Cuba be in the financial crisis that it is if you lift the embargo and allow other countries that you have allyships with to do business with them? It's not like countries don't want to do business, but the United States won't allow them because then that cut the ties that they're going to do with the United States. So I hate when people use that example because it's only based on the relationship you keep with the United States after the fact.
Was told about food and gas shortages, about unreliable electric grids. Independence never arrived in Puerto Rico, yet in 2022, Puerto Ricans faced electrical outages daily. Soaring poverty, particularly affecting children, makes life in Puerto Rico difficult. The lack of employment has also pushed many people from all social classes to migrate. The future without Puerto Ricans that Edwin Miranda dreamed about was not an abstract joke, but a political project that sought to make Puerto Rico a disappearing archipelago. As many Puerto Ricans struggle to survive or make ends meet, a new class of wealthy U.S. foreigners has arrived in the archipelago to take advantage of the government's tax incentives. Some of these new foreigners dream of creating utopic projects based on cryptocurrencies. For many in Puerto Rico, as the messages spray-painted with graffiti through the streets of San Juan attest, this is just another form of colonialism. New forms of colonialism. They call what they are building Puertopia, read the first line of a New York Times article published on February the 2nd, 2018. For many Puerto Ricans, this article was the first they had heard of entrepreneurs who had made their fortunes through blockchain and Bitcoin migrating to the archipelago. They want to build a crypto utopia, read the article, a new city where the money is virtual and the contracts are all public to show the rest of the world what a crypto future could look like. Blockchain, a digital ledger that forms the basis of virtual currencies, has the potential to reinvent society, and the Puertopians want to prove it. By the time the article was published, a handful of crypto investors had already settled in San Juan, making a former children's museum their base of operations. They would later buy the building, a symbolic gesture that showcased their desire to stay. These crypto investors also had conversations about buying the former Roosevelt Roads military base in the country's eastern district to begin their Puertopia, later renamed Sol. These colonial fantasies were also infused with New Age spiritual discourses. Brock Pierce, the former child actor turned movement guru, argued, "A billionaire is someone who has positively impacted the lives of 1 billion people." While being interviewed by a New York Times reporter, Pierce stood in front of a tree and prayed for Puertopia. After Hurricane Maria, Puertopians saw the archipelago as a blank slate. Instead of challenging these colonial desires, the Puerto Rican government encouraged the arrival of crypto investors. In March 2018, it sponsored a conference, Blockchain Unbound, and 800 people attended. Many were lured by tax breaks. In 2012, Governor Fortuño's administration passed 2 pieces of legislation to attract foreign capital, effectively making the country a tax haven. Acts 20, Export Services Act, and 22, Individual Investors Act, offered tax incentives to new residents or business arriving in the archipelago. While these acts did not include crypto businesses, it was extended to them through Act 60 of 2019. As legal scholar Jose Atiles notes, at present, any individual who spends 3 months in Puerto Rico can receive exemptions from federal and local taxes, capital gains tax, and taxes on passive income until the year 2035. For decades, the town of Rincon, in the western side of Puerto Rico, has been a surfing destination, attracting many white U.S. residents. In recent years, Puerto Rican residents have complained that tax breaks have accelerated the migration process, displacing Puerto Ricans due to the high housing prices. Samuel Sanchez Tirado, a Rincon resident, noted that those arriving don't ask for a price when they want to buy a property. They just hand you a check and ask you to fill out how much you think the house is worth. A report in El Nuevo Dia, Puerto Rico's largest newspaper in circulation, noted that the archipelago had 22,426 rooms being used for short-term rentals in 2022. In Old San Juan, 25% of livable units, 1 out of every 4 residences, was a short-term rental. According to government data, the rental industry grew by 99% in 2020. Puerto Ricans have also complained that tourists began venturing outside of the metropolitan area, triggering gentrification processes that increase rent and the cost of living in other municipalities. Tourism has been an important part of Puerto Rico's economy since the mid-20th century. In 2019, before the pandemic began, for example, tourism contributed 5.1% of Puerto Rico's total GDP. The government has used film and media to present Puerto Rico as a tropical paradise that U.S. residents can visit without a passport. It was no coincidence that the Puerto Rican government's slogan to attract these new crypto entrepreneurs was "Paradise Performs." But tourism is not always benign or beneficial. Caribbean peoples have long critiqued the ways that tourism has perpetuated colonial hierarchies between nations and exacerbated economic dependency. In 2020, as Puerto Rico was in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, Governor Wanda Vázquez Garcet requested that the Federal Aviation Agency close the Luis Muñoz Marin International Airport due to the high number of COVID cases. Her request was denied. Instead, travel continued despite the government's strict COVID restrictions and protocols. In 2021, the Puerto Rican government announced that tourism was generating record-breaking profits during the pandemic, particularly through rental taxes. The number of tourists flocking to San Juan during the pandemic created tensions with locals. News reports of trashed rentals, large brawls in public spaces, and fights with service industry workers became commonplace. Puerto Ricans responded by using social media to share memes, videos, and critiques. This created a sense that Puerto Rico was a playground for tourists, eerily reminding everyone of Edwin Miranda's dream of Puerto Rico without Puerto Ricans. Contrary to the mostly white U.S. foreigners whom the tax exemptions attracted, many tourists during the first stages of the pandemic were African Americans. In reaction to the tourist boom, some Puerto Ricans articulated a racist discourse toward them, as anthropologist Yarimar Bonilla noted in the Puerto Rican press. Instead of focusing on the type of tourism that we are receiving, we should reflect on how tourism represents a violent act in itself. Not only based on colonial legacies and the destruction of nature, but also in racist and sexist imaginaries that are reproduced by those who are also victims of it. Bonilla was not the only person warning against the violence of tourism. Beyond social media, Puerto Ricans use street walls as bulletin boards. In the Valdoriotti de Castro Avenue, one of the busiest highways in the archipelago, the activist art collective La Puerta painted a mural that said in bold letters, "Gringo go home, end colonialism." This was complemented by similar phrases from anonymous people throughout urban hubs. Phrases like "Gringo, you're not welcomed," and "Act 2022 equals ethnic genocide" were painted in bathroom stalls and on city walls or pasted on street poles. These are forms of everyday protest and resistance by those who seek to resist Edwin Miranda's dream. The politics of debt and everyday life. Since 1968, Puerto Rico's electoral history has been dominated by two traditional parties, the Partido Popular Democrático, or PPD, and the Partido Nuevo Progresista, or PNP. Each one defended a particular political status for the archipelago. The PPD created the Commonwealth during the 1950s, while the PNP advocated for statehood, or the incorporation of Puerto Rico into the United States. The Partido Independentista Puertorriqueño, or PIP, had been the runner-up shortly after its creation in 1946, but then became a minority party. And although the two parties alternating power had different views on the political status of the archipelago, as time went by, both parties became more and more alike. At the turn of the 21st century, the people of Puerto Rico began losing faith in their political apparatus. Voter turnout dwindled. More than 82% of eligible voters had cast their ballot in 2000, yet only 55% did in 2018. The second decade of the 21st century also saw the emergence of new political parties like the Puertorriqueños por Puerto Rico, Puerto Ricans for Puerto Rico in 2003, Movimiento Unión Soberanista, Sovereignist Union Movement in 2010, and De Partido del Pueblo Trabajador, Party of the Working Peoples in 2010. While their numbers continued to be small and all of them eventually dissolved after a few electoral runs, their existence demonstrated growing discontent with traditional politics. These parties accrued, along with the PIP, a marginal percentage of the overall ballots cast. In the 2012 elections, for example, minority parties only garnered 5% of the total ballots cast in Puerto Rico. In 2019, various social groups, including the former Partido del Pueblo Trabajador, joined forces to create a new political party, Movimiento Victoria Ciudadana, Citizens Victory Movement, or MVC. The party began as a coalition and internally elected Alexandra Lugaro for the governor's ticket. Lugaro is an entrepreneur who led a successful campaign for the governorship as an independent candidate in the 2016 elections, where she received more than 11% of the vote, an impressive number for a woman running without a party apparatus behind her. But MVC was not Alexandra Lugaro's party. Rather, it is a coalition composed of seasoned activists, community organizers, and politicians from traditional political parties. After the summer 2019 events led to the ousting of Governor Ricardo Rosselló, both the MVC and the PIP went through a moment of political effervescence. This was in part due to grassroots political campaigns focusing on a younger generation who did not feel represented by traditional political parties. These parties, then, articulated stances around gender, race, and sexuality that resonated with activists and young people tired of the bipartisan system they grew up in. The 2020 elections were the first since Rosselló left office, and they demonstrated that the bipartisan model had entered a moment of crisis. Pedro Pierluisi of the PNP party, a lawyer for La Junta who sought to take over the government when Rosselló resigned, but whose appointment was ruled unconstitutional by Puerto Rico's Supreme Court, won the governor's seat with less than 33% of the vote. Other parties saw their numbers grow drastically. The PIP, which had struggled to survive for decades, accrued 14% of the vote, something they had not been able to do since the 1950s. MVC also received 14% of the vote and was able to elect 2 senators and 2 legislators. Leftist parties were not the only ones that took advantage of the political moment. In previous years, conservative and religious fundamentalists had complained about their lack of representation in traditional political parties. In 2020, they created a party called Proyecto Dignidad, Dignity Project. While the idea of dignidad had been a rallying cry for social movements across Latin America, this group used the name in Puerto Rico to defend conservative ideas and values. They also succeeded in electing 1 senator and 1 legislator in the 2020 elections. Low voter turnout was not limited to elections. In 2020, the Puerto Rican government organized its 6th referendum or plebiscite on the status question. The first plebiscite had taken place in 1967. 4 others had followed in 1993, 1998, 2012, and 2017. While political parties have always negotiated language to negatively impact their opponents, some version of Commonwealth had always won these plebiscites, except in 2017, when statehood won, but with only 27% of eligible voters casting ballots. In 2020, statehood clearly won in the plebiscites, but less than 50% of eligible voters participated. For many Puerto Ricans, these non-binding referendums are a waste of government resources. The low number of votes also reflects distrust and discontent, particularly for a younger generation that feels like representative democracy failed them. Instead, they are enacting politics and other forms of participatory democracy beyond the ballot box. Radical street library projects are forcing people to rethink the ways they relate to space and private property. The Colectiva Feminista en Construcción has shown that demands are not made behind closed doors, but that in the face of a wave of femicides, the streets need to be public forums.
Mm-hmm.
Agricultural collectives are shaping the conversation toward the meanings of food sovereignty in a colony that imports almost 90% of the food it consumes. And activists have also created food pantries across the island to combat hunger from a radical standpoint. For many of the people who participate in these projects, decolonization is an urgent matter.
Mm-hmm.
Since they cannot continue to wait for elected officials to help them, they rely on themselves to do so. The phrase, solo el pueblo salva el pueblo, only the people will save the people, acquires power in this context. But activists also warn that we cannot romanticize the struggles people face by celebrating resilience. Many of these projects, while radical in their political orientation, stem from necessity. As some activists have argued, to survive in the colony is a radical act.
Listen.
And when that is the case, casting a vote every 4 years does not carry the promise of changing a situation that seems to be spiraling out of control. There is a direct correlation between voter turnout and the fiscal crisis that Puerto Rico has battled since 2006. Traditional parties are portrayed as not having done much to deal with the crisis. And for some, they are directly responsible for it. In 2017, Chief Justice John G. Roberts of the U.S. Supreme Court assigned U.S. District Judge Laura Taylor Swain to oversee Puerto Rico's bankruptcy case, one of the largest in the history of the United States. After almost 3 years of deliberations and discussions, Judge Swain agreed to restructure the debt. The deal erased $33 billion of the total debt while cutting $22 billion in bonds to $7 billion. Some of the junta's members celebrated this as an outstanding victory for Puerto Rico. Natalie Jaresco and David Skeel noted in a Wall Street Journal editorial that the United States had not addressed the question of Puerto Rico's status because of its enormous debt. That was, according to them, now resolved. Under their logic, their actions paved the way to solve the perennial problem of status. However, the refinancing process failed to address a major concern raised by multiple activist and civic groups.
Thank you for the follow.
Most of the debt had been accrued illegally, but the
Absolutely.
agreed-upon deal curtailed any possibility of an audit. Further, scholars Marisol Lebron and Sara Molinari have noted that La Junta has used austerity measures to slash funds and shrink the government since its creation. The debt's repayment plan, which will be shouldered by the people of Puerto Rico for 40 years, did not include any strategy to rebuild or address the many institutions affected by austerity measures. Without a clear national plan, it seems as if the Puerto Rican government's plan depended, once again, on foreign investment once the debt was restructured. In 2021, the Puerto Rican government effectively privatized the power grid. Luma Energy took over the distribution of electricity in the archipelago. With the privatization came multiple increases in electric bills at a moment when the infrastructure is so weak and unreliable that Puerto Ricans face power outages daily.
Absolutely.
Rent prices continue to surge as short-term rental companies cater to foreigners with purchasing power.
Airbnbs.
The fiscal crisis that began in 2006 continues without an end in sight.
In 2025.
Meanwhile, Jennifer Gonzalez, Puerto Rico's resident commissioner in Washington, a position that has no voting power in Congress, works toward the creation of yet another plebiscite to address the status question. Privatization and corruption continue to plague the Puerto Rican government. From 2020 to 2022, 24 government officials or people close to them were arrested on corruption or fraud charges including former Governor Wanda Vázquez Garcet. Corruption can mean many things. It does not have a simple definition. According to José Atiles, Gustavo A. García López, and Joaquín Villanueva, international organizations like the United Nations, the World Bank, and the International Monetary Fund broadly define corruption as the abuse of power for private gain. These scholars argue, however, that it is vastly more complex than that. In the case of Puerto Rico, corruption has served to legitimize U.S. colonialism in Puerto Rico, and U.S. capitalism, they note, has routinely pushed for instrumental anti-corruption measures and exceptional practices to ensure wealth extraction and profit-making while functionally pathologizing local leaders as untrustworthy, deviant, and otherwise corrupt.
We got 10 minutes left, y'all, to the book. So let's do me a favor. We at 31K. Let's try to get up to 35K. Let's end it out with a bang. I appreciate everybody who tapped in and who stood out this long. I know it dragged out a little bit when we get towards the end of the book. But do me a favor. Help me out. Let's get to 35K.
But corruption did not begin in 1898 with the U.S. occupation. Spanish merchants smuggled enslaved African peoples while much of the rural population of Puerto Rico depended on contraband. The foundation of Miguel Enriquez's fortune to the point of becoming the wealthiest Puerto Rican in the early 18th century stemmed from corrupt arrangements he made with Governor Gabriel Gutiérrez de la Riva. Later, in the 19th century, the white planter elite accused the laboring masses of being corrupt. In their opinion, the masses needed to be regenerated. This was also a foundational piece of the great Puerto Rican family myth. Before and after the U.S. occupation of 1898, politicians, elites, and government functionaries participated in schemes for personal gain. In a recently published study that used municipal audit reports to create a longitudinal data set, a group of scholars found that partisan politics after 1952, the year that the Puerto Rican Commonwealth was inaugurated, corruption cases were at the front and center of Puerto Rico's trajectory. Their report also demonstrated that institutional decay is directly correlated with the normalization of corruption practices over time. As this book has demonstrated, corruption did not cease during the first 2 decades of the 21st century. The country's colonial condition has created a managerial class that has benefited from Puerto Rico's current relation to the United States.
Yep.
While their corrupt practices have changed throughout time, they have maintained positions of power in Puerto Rico's public and political life. A breaking point came in the summer of 2019, when Puerto Ricans took to the streets to demand the resignation of Governor Ricardo Rosselló. While the masses were considered corrupt by elites in the 19th century, now it was the people accusing those in power of being corrupt and demanding change. But these protests were not solely about challenging corruption. As people occupied streets, spray-painted walls, and perrearon, twerked in front of San Juan's cathedral, new forms of understandings of Puerto Ricanness were being negotiated. While not much changed after the 2019 summer protests, those who participated in such events were changed by it. Corruption continues without an end in sight. In the western coastal town of Aguadilla, people protested an illegal development of a hotel on protected public lands. Acting with a sense of impunity, on January 29, 2023, private security officers shot live ammunition at the crowd, wounding one of the protesters. The event became a metaphor for the way that developers take over public lands, particularly Puerto Rico's beaches, without considering the well-being of Puerto Ricans. One of the lawyers representing the developers is Antonio García Padilla, former governor of Puerto Rico. Meanwhile, A few weeks later, journalist Sandra Rodriguez Cotto broke the news that a study noted that Governor Pierluisi's son, Anthony Pierluisi, owns 88% of all short-term rental properties in the San Juan area.
Yo, that's crazy.
And while this is not illegal in itself, the real estate does receive paid promotion from government agencies like the Tourism Company and Discover Puerto Rico. All these events take place while the social crisis continues, and with it, criminality, drug-related murders, and petty crimes are on the rise. Instead of presenting a comprehensive social project that is attentive to education, the economy, and holistic medical approaches to drug use, the government only employs mano dura policing practices. As this book has demonstrated, those policing practices have been used in the archipelago since the 1990s, and they have failed time and time again. The current situation with a defunded educational system, massive displacement and migration, and endless corruption seems as if it was made by design. But while former Governor Ricardo Rossello's friends dream of a Puerto Rico without Puerto Ricans, many anonymous people are working to build a Puerto Rico full of Puerto Ricans. That is, people are working to create liberatory futures for Puerto Ricans, no matter if they are in Santurce, Calle, and Cabo Rojo, or New York City, Orlando, or Milwaukee. El Apagón. Many young people identified as the Yo no me dejo generation during the 2019 summer protests. This term was coined by the rap and reggaeton artist Bad Bunny in a song with fellow artists Residente and Ile, released during the protests. Benito Antonio Martinez Ocasio, known as Bad Bunny, was a supermarket grocery bagger before becoming a global superstar. In 2022, he announced 3 new concerts in Puerto Rico with tickets only sold in person. Parts of the San Juan metropolitan area were shut down due to the massive numbers of people camping out in front of the stadium. His music has come to define a generation not only in Puerto Rico but globally. Unlike the chauvinist and macho ethos that dominated the reggaeton music genre, Bad Bunny represented a queer aesthetic with his brightly colored outfits, painted nails, and gender-bending performances. In Un Verano Sin Ti, his 4th solo studio album, Bad Bunny once again topped the charts and broke streaming records. One track, El Apagón, the power outage, became an immediate anthem in the archipelago. An upbeat tempo is accompanied by a crowd shouting, Puerto Rico está bien cabrón, Puerto Rico is fucking awesome, or Puerto Rico is really hard, depending on how you interpret it. As the title notes, besides the festive tone, the song is also a reminder of the dire reality lived by many in the archipelago. Toward the end of the song, Gabriela Berlingueri sings, Yo no me quiero ir de aquí, no me quiero ir de aquí. Que se vayan ellos, que se vayan ellos, que se vayan ellos, que se vayan ellos. Lo que me pertenece a mí, se lo quedan ellos. Que se vayan ellos. Esta es mi playa. Este es mi sol. Esta es mi tierra. Esta soy yo. I do not want to leave from here. Do not want to leave from here. Let them go. Let them go. Let them go. Let them go. What belongs to me, they keep it. Let them go. This is my beach. This is my sun. This is my land. This is me. The song documents a collective rage and discontent. Puerto Rico caters to wealthy U.S. foreigners, while Puerto Ricans are forced to leave. Many of those who have left note that they did not want to, just like Gabriela Berlingueri sings in the song. They left because they had no option. My grandfather left the archipelago in the 1950s, hoping to never come back. I write these final words on an airplane as I leave the archipelago once again. I, too, am part of what some have called the flying bus or the vaivén, a constant back and forth between the diaspora and the archipelago. I left in 2013 hoping to return for good, but I do not know if that will be possible. Yet, as Bad Bunny's song notes, many Puerto Ricans hope that they, the corrupt officials, capitalists, and ignorant foreigners, leave so we can return to our beaches, our sun, our land. Meanwhile, other Puerto Ricos are currently being imagined aquí o allá, here or there, wherever those places might be.
And that is a wrap. That's the ending credits. I ain't gonna be playing that right now. We sat here long enough. Yo, this is an awesome book. I think it deserves another round of applause. Don't forget, y'all, this episode will be up on YouTube with the other episodes. You can go listen to this book in its entirety. You can listen to Huey P. Newton Reader in its entirety. War Against All Puerto Rican in its entirety. Tomorrow we will be... No. Tomorrow I'll be in New York. I'll be at the People's Church tomorrow on 111th Street and Lexington Avenue. Celebrating Three Kings Day. We'll be handing out clothes. There'll be food, music, books for the children. A couple of activities going on from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. So if anybody's in New York City and you guys are in El Barrio on 111th Street and Lexington Avenue on the corner on the People's Church, we will be out there handing out, catering to the community, man. Boots on the ground, bringing that connection back to the community. But I like to start and end this with
My
my
journey
poem.
these past couple of years hasn't been easy.
Show me some love. Tap that screen, share this live. We about to get right into my poem. I appreciate everybody. Once again, most of this was shot in Yabucoa at the Marco Sanchez Community Center. We are going back to the Marco Sanchez Community Center in May, from May 2nd to the 10th. We will be there continuing the efforts we have, because if you see the video right now, you're going to see how big is that complex. It's huge, and it also has, it goes from kindergarten to 12th grade, and then you also got the Head Start that was also given to them. So needs a lot of work, a lot of effort. We go down there every 6 to 8 months. So if anybody's interested in participating, you live on the island, you want to connect, you want to build, you want to get involved with what we're doing, we do this to build bridges, because that's the disconnect between the diaspora and the mainlander. In the motherland is that cultural or historical disconnection that we think we have with one another. But I believe in building these bridges, we'll be able to fix a lot of these relationships and tackle a lot of the issues that affect both of us at the same exact time. But let's get into my poem, y'all.
Good, bad, or indifferent, it was worth it. Throughout my journey, I had so many inspirations, so many things that made me see things in a different light, even view myself from a different perspective, understanding that I don't have to be just another statistic, that I can seek to be who I want to be, not who they set out for me to be. With that being said, this is my response to the legendary Pedro Petri's Puerto Rican obituary, Puerto Rican resurrection. Hold up, what's going on? We've let too much time pass. It's been going on for far too long, struggling just to survive. Things seem so wrong. We worked, we were always on time. We were never late, just trying to survive. If it wasn't for Juan, Miguel, Milagro, Olga, Manuel, I would still be in denial. All dying for an American dream, waiting for their lottery numbers to hit. The promotion that never came, and a system that never gave a fuck from the beginning. So understanding and learning everything they struggled through, why do we continue to keep the cycle going? While screaming, yo soy boricua, pa que tú lo sepa. Please tell me, what good does that do if we continue to contribute to the system that has us where we're at? And I'm not saying you gotta be the next Captain Puerto Rico, I'm not saying all that. But let's look at the facts. So from 1493 Until 1898, Spain ruled the island of Borinquen, and within that time, we'd had massive genocide. So many people died on both sides. And what do I mean by both sides? Our Afro and Taino side that we could never deny because we hold with so much pride everything they went through just to survive, while the conquistadors took the whole island on a ride, committing so many criminal acts that words can never describe. 1898, here comes big old Tío Sam, el savior de Puerto Rico, decreasing the currency by 40%. Cause who needs to survive when you got Tío Sam's checks by your side? Can't forget about the imposement of citizenship, forcing us to rely, while Tío Sam takes a ride on the road of taxation without representation, and that comes with a lot of exploitation. Oh, what a great nation of which we reside. But what I realize, if you remove us from history, we don't see a future. This is why it's important to understand who is Pedro Avisu Campos, who is Arturo Alfonso Chambre, who is Lolita Lebron, who is Ramon Emeterio Betances, who is Mariana Bracetti, who are the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party, who are the Young Lords. All representation of greatness, all in their own right. But we are them and they are us, fighting for the same cause, liberation, self-determination, with no limitations. So we won't be dying, hating the make-believe steaks or the bulletproof rice and beans, or waiting for the supervisor to die to get that promotion. We will die freeing our bodies without having to use physical strength, but by arming ourselves with knowledge and education, not just for now, but for the future. Viva Puerto Rico libre, pa'lante, siempre pa'lante. Yeah, I hope y'all enjoyed that. Yo, salute to everybody who tapped in today. Definitely dope. Another book to check off. And that is a wrap, y'all. I'll see y'all tomorrow. I'm gonna see if I play no, not tomorrow. I'm gonna see y'all on Monday, because I just said that. I'll see you guys on Monday. I'm supposed to be playing Cuban American history, but let me see. I got almost 100 books on my Audible, and I got a lot of interesting books. Let me see, because I really want to play that one. I might play it next, or I might play it right after. Pero vamos a ver. We see Monday and see what we do, what we turn out with. But I really appreciate everybody for tapping in. One more time, round of applause for you guys. And I'll see y'all tomorrow. Peace, blessings, positivity, and don't allow anybody to mess up your day.